enough here at our place. This is George speaking. It's cold enough here that I wore my snowsuit going out to the mailbox this morning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not really, but it is cold.
I have 2 o'clock by my clocks, and we do have the bishop, so we'll go from there. Just again, as always, I try to keep everybody on mute as we're going, because there is a lot of background noise that always seems to happen, and that is part of just these kinds of calls. So what I will do is what I should do is unmute the bishop. It's an interesting power I have here as the organizer, but where'd we go? Where are you, Bishop? I'm trying to find you on my, there we go. Come on now. So, that's really odd. Bishop, you should be unmuted if you unmuted.
Yeah, there we go. Yep.
So if you would like to open us with prayer.
Okay, we'll prayer and lead off. Thank you, everyone, for being present on the call today. And as we begin our meeting together today, I'd like to offer a word of prayer. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we give you praise and thanksgiving for the gift of this day, for the beauty of this day, and especially during this Easter season that begins to unfold. We give you thanks for the gift of your Son, Jesus Christ, for his resurrection from the dead and for the new life that we enjoy and share through him, for the power of the Spirit that draws us together, especially in these challenging times. I ask you to be present with the wardens, treasurers, and clergy on the call as we discuss the affairs of our diocese and the way forward. We ask you also to be present with the people of our parishes whom we serve. We ask you to be present with doctors and nurses, frontline healthcare workers, researchers, those in governance, both locally, provincially, federally, and internationally, as we continue to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. Strengthen us always, Heavenly Father. It is your gracious promise to be present with us. We hear the words of your Son, Jesus, who says, "Peace be with you." May that peace fill our hearts and our souls today and into the future. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, welcome everybody. It's great to have you all here, and I'm just going to lead off today. Most of the call today is going to be devoted to Alec, and I'm sure you're anxiously waiting to hear some of the information that will be coming around the federal program. We've had note came out in the e-News Weekly, and also a letter that Alec sent out to the diocese yesterday related to that. So I won't be too long today. I just want to say a couple of things. First, thanks and appreciation for all that you did in terms of the Easter services, not only for the volunteers that stepped forward for the diocesan service and for Mark and the work that he did bringing all together, but for the various worship opportunities that I had the great joy to drop into some of them over the course of Easter. I started with a sunrise service out in Sealy's Bay. I went to Brockville. I went to Tynanega. I went to Kempville. It's fun flying all around the diocese and dropping into these worship services and wishing everyone a happy Easter. So very much thanks for all you're doing and all that you're doing locally around holding heart and home together in the life of the parish, especially for folks that are reaching out to those who are shut in. And all of that type of thing. And loneliness is such a huge issue. We're now moving into the second month of dealing with COVID-19 physical distancing guidelines. And I know there's going to be stresses and strains. I know there's stresses and strains. The clergy in providing leadership and have opportunity to be able to step back and rejuvenate as well. Also stresses on our leaders moving through, not only in terms of the leadership that you take in your various roles within the life of the church, but within your own families and in your community. I mean, we are all living a radically altered life now. So again, thank you so much for all that you are doing. One thing that will be new since our last meeting, we had issued new pastoral guidelines. They are available on the diocesan website under the pandemic page. We're going to be updating those. I've had, I think, 3 now requests that have come to me regarding the possibility of graveside services for funerals. And we have been taking a look at the guidelines around all of that. And I'll be updating those to provide an opportunity for it. The Bereavement Authority of Ontario has issued guidelines for the funeral industry. And in terms of gatherings in funeral homes, they have dictated that there is to be no more than 10 people in the entire home. And as you know, some funeral homes have multiple chapels and can be doing a number of services at once. But their requirement is that there be no more than 10 gather at that. And they go on to kind of underscore that that's a maximum number, and they would encourage gatherings of fewer than 10, if at all possible. That's the Bereavement Authority speaking to the funeral industry. So the question primarily for us has been around graveside services. Some of my colleagues in other dioceses are now addressing that, and they're looking at the possibility. They're linking into what the Bereavement Authority has been saying around that. When we put up the new guidelines, there'll be a link to a Q&A that frequently asked questions that the Bereavement Authority has put up. They're very helpful and quite extensive around what can happen and what can't happen. They get into small detail around that, and I think that would be helpful. But for the purposes of our guidelines, what we will say is we will follow the Bereavement Authority's direction, but in terms of gatherings at graveside services, because remember, in some cases at a graveside service, you're showing up, if it's a clergy or worship leader is showing up, and there may or may not be a funeral director involved, in which case, if it's just you as the worship leader, you're responsible for making sure that these guidelines are adhered to, and around physical distancing, around sanitation, around all of these things, because those are the requirements laid on the funeral industry. So what I'm saying is that if we have a gathering for a graveside service, that gathering be no more than 5 people. So I want to keep the gathering of 5. That's what the province has mandated for any kind of gathering, to be 5 or fewer. And notwithstanding the maximum that the BAO has put on this, they do recommend that it be less. And as you've been seeing as well, gatherings of more than 5 can make you subject to fines. I mean, bylaw enforcement officers and police have been issuing tickets to people when they gather and don't observe the physical guideline recommendations. But I do know that the difficulty of the balance in these very, very, very difficult times. And you'll notice in the frequently asked questions from the Bereavement Authority, they over and over again highlight and say, realize that this is an emergency situation we're dealing with. So this is what we're dealing with, and I'm trying in the direction that we give to always err on the side of extreme caution. So, but with that said, if for pastoral reasons, exigencies that exist, that a graveside service is possible through a funeral home, whatever, the gathering to be 5 or less. And the other thing to add into that, and this is where I think the Diocese of Niagara has been helpful, if you as a worship leader or clergy are in the high risk category, and that's been well delineated, people who are age 60 and over, people who have pre-existing medical conditions that make them particularly susceptible to COVID-19, what I would say is that you don't participate in any form of service at all. The risk is just too high, and I can't stress that enough. So it's a complicated thing. We're working this through as we go, but I know there are some situations I've been asked about, and so we'll be updating that. Those new updated guidelines should be up tomorrow on the Pandemic Hub, and you can access those and see where they are. But that's the only significant change that we'll see coming this week from my end of it, from the pastoral side and the guideline side. So with that, and then at the end of the meeting, again, we'll open it up for questions. So you can fire questions either Alec or myself about any of this. So if there's something you're thinking about, please don't hesitate to ask. But now I'll throw it up to Alec and he can pick it up from his part.
Great, thank you, Bishop. Let me just pop the charts up here. So we've worked our way to, I know what is on everybody's mind, which is, where is their help coming from? One of the multiple programs that the federal government has released is the CEWS program, we call it, no relation to Dr. Seuss, but the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy. The program was announced at the end of March. It has evolved, as is often common. Governments will announce something, listen to input, and I think in this case they did take input from both the charitable and the nonprofit segment, as well as the various businesses that are out there, based on how they had framed this up originally. One of the key things in this program is it's focused on the employee support rather than the employer. One of the other ones that's out there is the TWS program, which was employer-based. And so one of the things we have made clear is that nonprofit organizations and registered charities, including religious organizations, because that is not always a given, are eligible for this program. As we talked last week, the program is based on eligible remuneration that's paid between March 15th, which is when the government views that this shutdown began, and June the 6th, which is still currently the date that they're talking to. Quite likely it gets extended. Unclear if the program would extend with it or not. But it'll cover 75% of the remuneration paid, up to a maximum of $847 a week. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like for us. It also talks about if there's people that don't make that much, then there is they will still get included in it, but obviously not up to the maximum level. So eligible remuneration includes salary, wages, and other things, which in our case are things like taxable benefits. So for those that are receiving benefits that are reported on a T4, then they are also part of the remuneration that is eligible for this. Based upon that $847 a week, the math backwards is, if it was in place for 52 weeks, that would be the equivalent of $44,000. That $44,000 would represent 75%. So if you gross it up, basically the maximum any individual would be covered for, if it was completely annual, would be remuneration up to $58,000. So just to put that in context, if you look at our stipend grid for clergy on a full-time basis, it's actually about $61,000 or $62,000. Is if you take housing and stipend alone, those get you well over that $58,000 threshold. For those that are part-time clergy, and we have either part-time clergy or retired clergy that are working on an interim or supply basis, or lay staff, whether they be full-time or part-time, they are eligible to, again, up to 75% of what they're what they have been compensated. A couple of things that have evolved through this. The income loss threshold was originally announced as 30%. And then they realized that March was only half a month. So what they did to simplify it was to get it down to 15% for the month of March. And so that was one change that was made. The other thing that was made, change that was made, they realized that not all businesses and not all not-for-profits are in a stagnant state. So, for example, if you started a business and it was making a low amount of income last March, and this, because you've just started, and this year you've quadrupled your income, you wouldn't qualify. So that was viewed as not being fair. In our case, and in many other charities, the monthly incomes are lumpy. Some months are better than others, some months are higher than others, some months are lower. So what they've done is they've now created a choice for us. We can measure the drop in revenue, the 15% for March, 30% for April and May, either based on the prior year month, so March to March, March 2020 against March 2019, April 2020 against April 2019, or May 2020 against May of 2019, or they offer us the option of averaging January and February and looking at that as the comparator. So if our March income was 15% below the average of Jan and Feb. One of the key elements here is you can only elect once. You can't go, well, for March, I want to do it this way. For May, I want to do it this way. In April, I want to go back. You can't do that. One of the things, and we'll come back to what we're asking for later, but of course, look at January and February, which are often lower months for income in churches after the surge at the end of the year, and also, of course, where Easter was in 2019. So the reality is that we want to, for comparative purposes, use the baseline as the largest income we can. And my personal suspicion is that will be the prior year's equivalent month, but we're going to ask for the data to be able to calculate it both ways. The other choice that can be made is whether you report on an accrual basis or a cash basis. And this is mixed across the piece in our churches, but having consulted with our auditor, pretty much clear we'll use it as the accrual basis because that's where the bulk of it's going to sit. Just around specifics, the periods, this just gives you a view of the periods, March 15th to April 11th, compared to March of 2019, or an average of January and February. And the income threshold, reduction threshold there to qualify is 15%. So for clarity, that means if your income went down by 13%, you don't qualify for the program. If your income went down by 15 or over, you qualify. The second period is April 12th to May 9th. And again, you can, based on your first election, choose to where to compare to. And the third program period is May 10th to June the 6th. Oops. So just a couple of clarifying pieces. They've announced a number of programs. There's the CEWS, there's CERB, the Canadian Employment Rate Program. There's the temporary wage subsidy. There's a number of them across there, but they are mutually exclusive. We can't sort of pick and choose and select between them. We are still, based on the input we're getting, about 1 to 2 weeks before the website is actually available to us. On the CRA, it'll be part of the CRA's business account side, and that one is not, they're not up there yet. Best guess is earliest to be a week, more likely is 2. You will be required to apply for March. Basically, March will be, if you qualify for March, they'll include you for April, and then you'll report April and May. So you have to adjust, but they will pay through. We continue to work with our diocesan solicitor. We continue to work with our financial advisor, our audit firm. We continue to work with other dioceses and through a number of contacts into the federal government to make sure that we have the right understanding of the program, that we have compliance correct, and that we continue to influence as things may evolve going forward. So one of the things that has been clarified, and by the way, this legislation was actually approved last Saturday. I think, as most are probably aware, Parliament is functioning right now based upon a prorated group that represents the shares in the House, but is a small group that has the power of Parliament. They approved this legislation last Saturday, and that then gives the folks the actual context to be able to work within. So one of the things that was made clear is that in order to apply for CEWS, for the emergency wage subsidy, you have to have an employer account, and that account must have been active in place on March the 15th. So one of the implications for that is that basically we have one account for the whole diocese. Because we process payroll, we submit the withholdings, so income tax, employment insurance, CPP, that all flows through one single number, and all the processing is done through our core account. Therefore, the application for CEWS must be done at the diocesan level. And the reason for that is simple. Number one is, while most parishes will have a CRA account, it'll be one that's in place for typically for HST, refund purposes, and typically, obviously, for your charitable returns. But most churches will not have, because it's all done through the diocese, an employment account. So one of the issues there is that the CRA won't see the given employee under that employer number. And so they'll go, wait a minute, you're applying for benefit for someone that you're not paying. So that's one of the reasons they've made it only the one place can you go. So we're going to need to submit one application on behalf of the entire diocese, and that will include clergy, that'll include diocesan staff, like myself, that will include lay staff that sits in churches, full and part-time, provided that they are on central payroll. And so one of the questions that I know that's going to generate is, well, what about someone in our church who is offered an honorarium? For example, some organists aren't paid on a salary basis. It's not reported on a T4 or a T4A. So in those cases, the subsidy is not available because, again, the CRA has no record of that person being an employee through our account. That also means that the revenue reduction will be across the entire diocese. So that revenue reduction will be the consolidation of all parish income. And so that is the other key thing that falls through with this. We need to apply for the credit based, or for the subsidy based on each employee, each of the clergy, each of the lay staff, and we need to qualify for the program based upon drop in revenue across all churches, and that is an important piece. Once we apply and are qualified, the CRA will pay the subsidy back to the diocese because, again, that's where it's been applied to. Once we receive it, then we will credit each church's account with what they are due, what they're qualified from it. In most cases, for full-time clergy, that's going to be $847 a week. And so we will credit that back to the payroll account. For those that have not yet fully met their payroll, it will address a chunk of that. For those that have fully met payroll, it'll provide you with a credit to be applied on the next month. And so what we will do is make sure when that money comes in each month, that we'll advise the churches that the money has been received. So if you add up the benefit of this subsidy program across the diocese, and you add up all of our clergy, all of our diocesan staff and officers, and we include the parish staff, well over $500,000 of benefit over the period of this program. So this is a big deal for us. In order to make this work, we have to have the income from all the churches for the months requested. I'll come back to this in a little more detail. In order to support the submission, and therefore to have each church qualify for their staff to be included. It's essential and it is mandatory that all churches provide the required income data to us by next Friday. Right? This one, well, many times we try to get and then we chase. This one is really important because all of us live with this together. So we're requiring this information back in and looking to get it as soon as we can. What we're going to do is post a fillable PDF, which will be emailed out to everybody on the distribution list, as well as posted on the Diocesan COVID Hub. So that'll be there as well. And I'll show you the form in a minute. That the intention has been to keep it as simple as possible. And there's the form. It is a one-page fillable PDF. So if you download it from the website or pick it up from the attachment and when you get your letter, those fields are all you can type right into them. Or if you can't work that through, you can handwrite it in and scan it or send it back to us. What you'll see is we're looking for obviously for the name of the church or the parish, who completed the form, the name of the wardens, because we need the wardens to indicate that they have approved this. The wardens are, of course, the corporation for each of the churches. Email address for contact, and finally the date completed. In there, you see we're asking for each month to provide the income for the month. And so that income, and we'll provide further detail on this with it, but it includes collection, PAG, donations, and rentals. Rentals are part of your normal income. You would not include any grants that you receive. So, for example, if you receive a new ministry grant, previously known as a curacy grant, or you are receiving any other kind of money from the diocese or from a government or from a foundation, that we would not include that money. Also wouldn't include any money that was received for a capital campaign, because again, that's not normal operating income. That's money that's received for a special project. So we would look for you to reduce that. Finally, you also wouldn't include any income or anything that was taken out of your investments. And that, from our perspective, would include the interest in that is drawn each quarter. So we're looking to keep that, because that's not part of your normal operating income from how you normally derive that income. And so what we're looking for, because again, we want to be able to do the comparators to determine what's the best way to go forward. So we're asking for March 2019, April 2019, and May 2019. And then January, February of 2020, in order to use those as to average and use that as the optional comparator, determine which works better for us. And then the actual revenue for March, which again will indicate the loss. You'll notice that each of those has a notes section under it. If there's anything unusual in there, or there's anything that you want to make note of, then that's the place to do it. If you're not sure, put a note in and we'll check it back with you. So recognizing that, different churches, different sizes, and different practices. In some churches, there's a monthly report generated by the treasurer that, and particularly would often go to parish council or advisory council. So obviously in those churches, you have those reports and you can quickly come to that. Also recognizes there's churches that may not do it every month. So having reviewed this with our audit firm, The guidance there is to use your bank statements. And so for March of 2019, pull up your bank statement and report on the total deposits. And again, looking to exclude anything you may have put in for a major capital campaign, and often that'll be in a separate bank account anyway. Any major donations, the ones that aren't typical, withdrawals from the diocesan fund, and any grant money. But basically, you can the assumption is that with the bank statement as the proof that, most churches are taking their money, what they receive on a Sunday, and what they receive in their PAGs on a monthly basis, and they're depositing that into their account. And so the guidance from our legal and our financial counselor is that would be sufficient as proof. We do suggest keeping the backup so that if we ever got questioned on this, that can be used to document it. Speaking of documentation, the CRA, and they've been very positive with this. However, they've made it clear they will be ensuring compliance. Unfortunately, there are people out there that will try and take money that they're not entitled to, or try and bend programs. So what they're doing is, because of the situation, they're going to make the subsidies pay this stuff out, and then after the fact, they will be doing audit. They have been clear that that anyone who provides a false or misleading information to take a benefit in this program, that you'll be guilty of an offense. Now, if a mistake is made, then it'll be a matter of paying back the benefit, as well as potentially interest. If there's viewed that there's, just like on our income tax, that there was some intention, then there's penalties will be associated with it. And finally, of course, if they view that it was done in a fraudulent matter on a material basis, it can include imprisonment. I will point out that makes the officers, so that would make the officers of the diocese, and as wardens, as the officers of the church would all be subject to that. Personally, while I enjoy all of your company, I certainly enjoy the Bishop and Wayne's company, but I have no desire to share a jail cell with anybody. So let's make sure, please, that we provide stuff we can back up, and that we don't kind of fudge with the system. So to kind of wind this up a bit, this chart, you've seen most of it previously. We're morphing it as we go. So we're continuing to conserve resources to support as this continues. So then that, for the first part, means just cutting discretionary spending. So the things that we can control in the near term. We have prioritized payments for the investment fund to churches that are providing us with forecast, and that we've got a cap of $25,000 per month per parish in order to make sure that we don't cause ourselves issues with the investment fund. We have worked with our broker advisor, and there's advised them that we're keeping $500,000 that is reasonably liquid quickly, to be able to be accessible for us as we go forward. The SUS, the Emergency Wage Subsidy Support, as I mentioned, assuming we qualify for that, based on all the input we receive in the next week, that's critical. That is well over $500,000, and the bulk of that money ends up in churches' accounts. So that really is an important piece. The final thing is that we have established a working group on a support plan based on the forecast data that you have all sent in. We still have a couple of churches out there that have not provided their forecast data. I contemplated naming them today, but decided not to. Next week, I suggest that if we don't have income data back, I think because we're all in this together, my intention would be at this meeting next week to share any churches that have not gotten back into with this, because we're all in it together. For those that haven't provided their forecast data, we're following up with you. There's only a small number left, and we need to make sure that we've got complete data to work with. Synod Council will then consider on the 28th the recommendations that will come forward on other potentials for support. So with that, I will take everybody off mute from this end. What I would ask is you go back on mute unless you're speaking. And if you could just physically do that in a moment, because what happens is there's a lot of noise that occurs, you know, in your home or wherever you are. There's sometimes multiple people around, but it does create it very distracting for everyone else on the call. So I'm going to take things off mute and ask that everybody goes on mute unless you're asking a question. You can also ask questions via the chat function. That's that round the circle that's on your client that lets you chat and ask questions that way if you don't want to speak through with them. So, coming off mute.
Hi, Alex. Alex?
Good. Hello.
Can you hear me, Alex?
I can.
Hi, it's Gary Thornhill. I have three questions. Do you prefer the parish central treasurer submit this new information or the individual churches?
I think it provided it will make it easier if we get it from the parish level. If the central treasurer is able to do that, I think that makes it easier. So if you're able to do so, then that's fine. If you can't, then at the individual church, as long as you're clear on the form that it's for a parish, then that's great.
Okay, my next question is, you said about you're going to be crediting the payroll accounts once the money comes in from the government. What about the post-dated checks that some churches have already sent in for the year? We don't want those cash because we're going to build up a lot of credit. So is there a plan there?
Yes. So basic, and I've heard from a couple of churches, but if right now, we're not going to cash checks until we've confirmed with a church that they're able to that the check won't bounce, and B, as we work through this kind of subsidy thing, the amounts will need to be adjusted.
Okay. And my last question, you mentioned that we should not include interest that we receive each quarter from the diocesan fund. Did I understand that correctly?
Correct. And that being that the primary purpose of our is the fundraising that we do is our primary income, and that's where the focus is. So the counsel we've had is that investment funds withdrawn, which would include interest that's generated in that account, we would not count as income for the purposes of this.
Oh, really? Okay. Okay. That's all my questions. Thank you.
I've got a couple online here. I had somebody ask if the parish doesn't meet the threshold of loss, but the whole diocese does, will that church get the credit? And the good news there is yes. So the good news is that we will all be in exactly the same boat. So the diocese, as we report in total, will either make it or not. And so once we cross the threshold, all employees will be from parishes that report in will be included. So there's not an issue there. Let me see. I had a question on, does the SUS form require the warden's signature? At this point, I would say no, because we're looking for speed here. And so what I'm going to ask in the letter is that the wardens are named on the form and that the wardens are copied on the email when it's sent back in. So that at that point, unless a warden indicates, wait, my treasurer was off base here, then we will accept that it is a compliant and legal.
Alex, quick question.
Yep.
Any money that's coming back to the diocese will be placed in the diocesan account first, and will the credit for each individual church, will that money go back into their respective bank accounts?
It will not go into the bank account. It will go into your payroll account at the diocese. So it will, the credit for that will go back because we've already paid it on your behalf. So it'll go into your payroll account, either helping it catch up, or it will give you credit towards the next month.
And if we do a cash balance every month with the ledger, how are we going to show actual expenses for salaries when it won't, we won't have to send in the same amount?
Correct. So what you will do is, first of all, is that we're not collecting. We're not collecting expense information with this. Only income. So at the parish level, what you would do is you would then show that you owed $7,000 and you got $2,000 of a subsidy and you paid $5,000. So you would that's how you'd show it. We can provide, one of the things we can do is provide a little online session to talk about how to record this, but you would not show this as income. It's a subsidy.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just flipping through some other ones. I've had questions around things like, we have income from rentals in halls. We have income from solar panels and those kinds of things. If that is income you're generating as part of your operating, then yes, you need to include that. Presumably, your rental income will have declined in the month of March and April and May because you won't be renting your hall out to those groups. Other
what about
questions?
HST reboot, Alex?
No, you wouldn't count that as income, no.
Thank you.
Alex, this is Wendy Kubashevsky from St. Thomas, Kingston.
Hi, Wendy.
We have employees that we do pay salary to, and they're not paid through the diocese. Their benefits are paid from the church. How do we account for them?
So do you T4 them?
Yep.
So you must then have a separate payroll account.
I only know of one actual account. Everything goes through it. It's all categorized.
Okay, well, we may want to, maybe what we'll do is after the call, we can chat with Joyce to make sure we're clear through, because basically, if they're not flowing through our central payroll, then they're not going to be familiar. The CRA is not going to know who they are.
Exactly.
Right? And so we'll have to look at how if you're doing that, how we deal with that.
Thank you.
There's always assumptions. There's always exceptions, sorry. So let me, a couple of other ones from online. Flow-through donations like PWRDF, I think we can safely exclude those. We exclude those from CMM and a number of other things. I think they're safe to exclude because they are purely flow-throughs. And I think, again, I got a couple of questions around accounting. So I think we can take that into a special session, and we'll try and write something up in terms of for you how to report this. and in your books and report it on your statements come next year. I think next year's vestry reports, financial statements are going to be interesting things regardless. I had a question around vestry meetings, and I know this applies to a few, but where you've not yet had a vestry meeting, then, and you can't hold a vestry meeting remotely. So what happens is that the current officers would continue. If a warden decided they didn't wish to continue or were unable to continue, then what can happen is they can then resign. And again, under the canons, if a vestry doesn't elect a warden, the incumbent can appoint a warden. Similarly, by the way, in some churches, the incumbent doesn't appoint a warden, and therefore the vestry elects two. So in this case, if you've got a situation where you don't have a warden, a little bit of noise from somewhere, sorry, then the incumbent can appoint a second warden. And I think you would make that on the understanding that when a vestry is held, that person would either be ratified or step aside. But basically, you don't have approved financials, etc. Those are things that we recognize have to be an exception to the canonic requirement for March. Had a couple of, go ahead, yep.
You said you're going to be mailing out that form today?
The plan is to get that email out today, yes.
Okay, you haven't sent it yet then?
I have not.
Okay.
And it'll go up on the hub, and then we will prioritize any questions for support that's required next week.
Alex, it's Mary Hay. We have a thrift shop. Do we include the thrift shop income?
Well, I can argue yes or no, but I would be willing to bet you that your thrift shop revenue for the second half of March and April and May will be what, Mary? Pretty much
Well,
zero?
they should be zero closed.
So I think in that case, it's part of the operation of your church, and I think that would be fair to apply, like a rental, to apply that.
We have a thrift shop as well, but ours is a separate legal entity, so I assume we would not report that.
That's correct. Yeah, you can't report that. So I think we seem to have covered the bulk of things there. If you've got specific questions, of course, you can, the quickest way probably is email. We do the pandemic account is there. That's monitored constantly, and we flow things through there. That's where the form should be returned to. Let me just now turn back to the bishop, and Wayne is also on the line. If anybody has any other, I mean, obviously the SUSE program has got everybody's attention, and as it should, $500,000 plus certainly gets my attention on any given day. But are there any other questions for the bishop, or Wayne's on the line as well, from a stewardship and program perspective? Any other questions or anything else that anybody kind of wants to share or talk about?
I'd like to, it's Fred Butler. I'd like to maybe ask the bishop, when this started, you were looking at a target date of May 15th. There are some rentals booked at end of May. Is this the end of May 15th being relooked at the your House of Bishops, or?
Yeah, definitely, Fred. We are moving things like what we do in the diocese is we've been working with, and where that May 15th piece came up in the beginning was we laid an 8-week window over everything, so that we would say everything within that week window would be canceled. And then as a week goes by, because it's very difficult to predict when this is going to alleviate. And I think even today, nobody has the answer to that. And in some cases, things are getting canceled now through the summer, and in some cases into the fall. We still don't have any clear answer on that, but we work for working basis. We go through a week and then we move that 8-week window along so that everything ahead of it is canceled. But I think it would be safe to assume, based on everything that we've been seeing across the province for sure, is that anything up until the summer is gone. I know the Diocese of Ottawa had held out hope they'd be able to have the consecration of their new bishop on the 31st of May, but they're just kind of holding it out as a hope. I don't think there's any realistic expectation that by the end of May we'll be in a position to be able to draw together in any kind of anything beyond the guidelines. I think the province of Ontario, and I could stand to be corrected on this, has extended the emergency provisions to into May, I believe.
Yeah, they went till May. They went till May 12th.
May 12th. That was it. I knew it was the middle part of May. I didn't know exactly when. So I think it'd be safe to assume that you can inform anybody up until. And normally in the world of the church, by the time we get to the end of June, things go into that summer hiatus, and so we get to that point. But I think it's safe to assume that everything before then is gone.
Oh, sorry. So it's just that we had some seasonal rentals at the end of May, so I will cancel them.
Yep, I think that's a safe bet.
Okay, thank you.
And it's highly likely that as this, once things, they're not going to lift entirely, it's going to lift gradually. And we'll get back into a space where you may be allowed 20 or 25 or 50 people, but there will be a ton of restrictions that we'll live with for a long time.
Yeah, this is not going, the one thing that we've talked about at the House of Bishops, and we meet every week, is that when this begins to change, it's going to be an incremental change back, because there's great fear of a rebound of this virus in the fall, and we want to avoid that. So like I say, that it's going to be incremental when it does start to change.
Alex,
I think.
Go ahead. I see a question there from Mary about the update on the online bill payments.
Yes, so we have now, we will shortly, the Bank of Montreal will shortly be set up with BMO to do online payments for you to select us as a payee. We're still working through the other banks because the way the system works is you can get set up by BMO, but then each of the other banks need to put you into their system. So we will be there. The plan is next week we will hopefully have the BMO stuff will be complete. But one of the questions that was raised, and it may have been Mary that raised it, was how we recommend parishes handle the 2-signature approval from a governance perspective in churches once you can do online payments. So next week, hopefully we'll be able to update everybody on SUS as well as how we're going to handle these going through. But we are doing payments to parishes online. We have several withdrawals that are in the last bit of, they've been approved and they'll be processed shortly. And those will also be direct deposited. So I know there's a couple of them that have come in and they will go out, they will go in the next few days, but they will go electronically into your bank account.
I noticed, Alec, that there was a question about the calculation of income for memorials that come in. And I would assume those aren't calculated in, they come into a memorial account.
And typically the memorial account is, again, where stuff is targeted. And so there's a difference in how they will look at this from the perspective of, is it a one-time donation that is to general operations And do you get those every month or every couple of months versus, someone has passed away, left $5,000 for a particular purpose or task. Those things we want to be able to exclude. You want to exclude those things. They're not part of your normal run rate of income. I had a request to share the income slide again. And these slides, by the way, will go up on the website after this call, and then as this recording will as well. But let me just pop this back up. Get my I'll pop this back up there it is. Couldn't get this, there we go. And share. I think this is the chart being asked for. And again, there's always going to be, each church has unique pieces like thrift shops. Again, I was asked a question once about cemeteries. And again, if cemeteries form a significant part of your normal income, then they would look at that and say, yes, you need to count that. If you're selling, 2 or 3 a year and it's on an irregular basis, then that would not be something you'd use for comparative purpose. So we're up towards the top of the hour. Any other? Just flipping through.
Alex, it's Betty Shear calling from Cardinal. I do have one question on your last statement. We get $1,000 quarterly from our ACW towards expenses. Do I count that?
So I did ask that question. The ACW is not arm's length. So your ACW is part of your church, right?
Okay.
So you would include whatever the ACW would have in a prior year.
Okay, thank you.
It's not reported elsewhere. If it's part of if they're doing it every quarter, every year, then it is part of your normal income.
You'd only do it for the months they did it, though, Alex, right?
That's correct. If the ACW pays out every December, which I know some do, then it doesn't fall into this period. We don't need to talk about it.
Okay.
If you've got something that happened last March, April, or May that caused an unusual lump, then get a hold of me and we'll talk about it. I just want us to be consistent. We need to be consistent.
Yeah, I'd want to reiterate that too, in terms of the financial or the pastoral side of things. And it's been good that I've received phone calls or communications from people asking about some of these questions and getting clarification. So I certainly would encourage, if there's any confusion at all, to call.
The other question I had is, will the 75% subsidy, will this subsidy be subject to CMM? And I suppose we'll have to we'll have to look at that. That's not my first priority at the moment. What we're not looking to do is cause a lump for churches in 2022 around CMM. We're also not looking to put the diocese into a financial crunch. So we'll work this through, and I'll get council to approve the policy on that. This is something unusual. Okay, well, Bishop, can we turn back to you to lead us in the conclusion?
Very good. Thank you, Alec, for all the work that you're doing on this. And I know the people that you have gathered around you to help you with it too. I mean, a remarkable group of people, and they're putting a lot of time, effort, and energy into making sure we have the best information that we have in terms of how we approach this and deal with it. So thank you very much for all that you're doing and the team that you're working with. And as the, you know, like the wardens, the treasurers, and the clergy, you too have been thrown into this washing machine of change rather quickly, and it's kind of now consumed all the work that's happening out of your office. So thank you so much for that. And again, thank you to the wardens, the treasurers, and the clergy on the call today for all that you're doing. And you really, you know, just, well, why should I expect anything different? We're the best diocese in the province of Ontario, if not the country. And I tell that to the House of Bishops all the time. So anyway, so you're doing a wonderful job. And thank you so much for that and for being on the call today. With that, I think we come to the top of the hour and time to conclude. And so let's all, as good Anglicans, say the grace. And we don't have to go home, which is the interesting thing. We are home. So let's say the grace together. The grace of our Lord, the love of God,
the fellowship of the Holy Spirit
be with us
all evermore.
Amen.
Amen.
Blessings, everybody.
Thank you, folks.
Thanks, Alan. Bishop. Wayne.
Thank you.